Right now, there's outrageous statements being made about a series of things, most of which are completely out of control. The day and the time in which we are living is highly polarizing, and when it comes to the Middle East, that is certainly no exception. If you want to know what's really going on, tune in, because what you hear will arm and equip you for the battle we are fighting in the current day. Get ready, folks. Your toolbox is about to be loaded. All right, let's get into this. Now, I can just tell you this right now. There will be some people that will not like what I'm about to say, but it needs to be said. And you have to understand that I don't say these things for the sake of controversy. I say them because they're true. And we know that the issue at hand, and has been the issue at hand since October 7th, is the subject of Israel. And there has been a lot of insanity that has gone back and forth with respect to the issue of Israel, what's happening in Gaza, the Palestinians, the Arabs, all of the geopolitics. You guys know more than anybody that I have been a man that has gone out of my way to defend the position of Israel on a lot of levels. But my mom and my dad were both born and raised in Egypt, and my mom spent a portion of her life in Gaza as a missionary. So I have a tremendous heart for the region as a whole, which is why I'm going to say what needs to be said. Now, I need to start off with something, because if you do not catch what I'm about to say, you're not going to understand the rest of what gets communicated to you. And I want you to know this. You cannot carry this thought completely through unless you understand the biblical premise for why it's being carried. So how about we talk about this for just 1 second? In the book of Colossians, Paul writes to the church in Colossae, and this is what he says. I'm going to start at verse 15 of Colossians chapter 1. He's talking about Jesus. He says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Notice this in verse 16. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. Now, I am not going to get into the inner depths of the most significant portions of the theology that drives this, and the very thing that is critically important to grasp here. I'm going to speak about the premise of the conversation that we're having, and this passage fuels that premise. Here's what it is. And you guys, listen, you have to understand this. The Bible makes it clear that for everything that is going on in the physical realm, there is something else that's happening in the spiritual realm. The Apostle Paul said this to the church in Ephesus. He said in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, he told them to be strong in the power of the Lord and in his might. And he tells them, put on the whole armor of God that you will be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And I want you to remember that phrase, the wiles of the devil, because we're going to go somewhere with this. And believe me, please stick with me. I am coming to a conclusion that I think is critically important for you to be able to understand everything that's going on overseas, everything that's happening in America, and what's going on in the region. He says this in verse 12. Here's the reason why he told everybody to do this. He said, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So he's making it very clear that the battle that we are fighting is a spiritual battle. And when that battle is not waged correctly, the way it manifests itself within the physical is so remarkably destructive that it is beyond life-changing. It completely manipulates everything that we see on every level, in every end. And that is exactly what's going on. I also want to make this statement, because I think it's critically important that we understand this. Israel's not going anywhere. If you read Amos chapter 9, God says that he will plant them back in their land, never to be taken away. He makes that very clear. God does not mess around when he makes promises like this. Jeremiah chapter 31, a lot of people need to read this passage because people say that individuals have forsaken God, Jews specifically, and as a result, God will forsake them and never allow his promises that he's made to them to come through. That is not the case. Understand what it says here, and I'm going somewhere, okay? I promise you, stick with me. I'm going somewhere here. Jeremiah chapter 31, starting in verse 35, he says this, "Thus saith the Lord, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and the stars for a light by night, which divideth the sea when the waves thereof roar, the Lord of hosts is his name." Listen to this, folks. This is verse 36. "If those ordinances depart from before me, saith the Lord, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever." Thus saith the Lord, verse 37, "If heaven above can be measured and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I will also cast off the seed of Israel for all that they have done, saith the Lord." Understand this, folks. Understand what God is saying. He is basically saying, through the use of some pretty substantial pictures, that he's never going to be done with Israel. He's making that very clear. So with that said, what in the world is going on right now over there? What are we seeing? What are we seeing with the insanity that we see represented by what Hamas did? I don't care what anybody says. They're terrorists. We have to start with the polarization that's happening right now. I just saw an interview with Andrew Tate, who, by the way, in many ways to me is absolutely reprehensible. Don't get me wrong, he's a very smart person, but the things that that man said concerning Israel is reflective of a completely uninformed perspective of what is happening in the region, and I can't blame him because he was not raised in the area. He doesn't understand Islam, although he claims to be Muslim. He is definitely completely unaware of what the Quran says, and I don't want to focus on him because there's been a lot of people saying a lot of crazy things on both sides, many of whom are not giving an accurate representation of the facts or speaking about the brevity of the matters that are going before us. If you look at some of the comments that maybe Candace Owens has made, or you look at the comments that Ben Shapiro has made as they're fighting back and forth between one another. And believe me, I'm not condemning any of these people. I'm simply pointing out the level of polarization that exists amongst this crowd. Or look at some of the people that Piers Morgan has interviewed recently. Folks, literally 24 hours after Hamas did the horrific acts of terror that they did, you had people on school campuses in the United States of America, no joke, standing in support of Hamas, not understanding that if they stood in the middle of downtown Gaza, they would be killed. We can sit here and we can talk forever and ever and ever and ever and ever about what the facts are and what the facts are not. We talk about this on a regular basis. I had an interview with the brother of the Prime Minister of Israel. You heard what Dr. Netanyahu told me. He made it clear, and I can tell you he's right about this. You can sit down and you can try to debunk every single lie that's being told, and with that, there will be a new lie that will come into place. So the issue does not sort of put us in a position where we refuse to speak about these things. We want to debunk every single lie, and we want to tell the truth, but there's a bigger issue at hand, and the bigger issue is that this is spiritual. Folks, I did a video a few days ago, sometime last week, where I featured a school in Northern California that rose a Palestinian flag without flying an American one. In solidarity for who? Certainly not in solidarity for the Palestinians, because the Palestinians are the ones that are suffering the most as a result of all of the wickedness of Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. We talk about the idea that somebody should have a right to vote because they're not voting over there when Mahmoud Abbas hasn't had an election in 16 years, 15 years, 16 years. The Palestinian population in Gaza hasn't been able to vote since 2008, since Hamas came into office. Think about exactly what's going on. And by the way, when I say Hamas came into office, what I mean to say is since Hamas actually took over, since Hamas actually decided to put their wicked and evil footprint and seek to build the type of war machine whose whole goal is to eliminate the Jewish state. It's in their charter. So we can go back and forth and we can talk about all of these details, and we can talk about the fact that, Gaza has been in the possession of Palestinians for, my goodness, almost 20 years, and Israel has not been in Gaza whatsoever. And the reality of it is, when Israel defends themselves, yes, there's some involvement in Gaza, but the reality that sits around all of this centers around the fact that it is a retaliatory act and not one that is involving some sort of imposition or some kind of a commencement of some war action or genocidal action. Give me a break. We're not talking about genocide here in Gaza. You're talking about a population of 2.1 million just in Gaza alone, and the total population of Arabs in Israel when Israel came into their land, back into their land after they were reborn, was somewhere around 300,000 to 500,000 Arabs. Now, if there's active genocidal behavior going on and they're trying to destroy the Arabs that are living in Israel right now, you would not have a total population of almost 6 million Arabs living in Israel. Let's be real about this, folks. This is absolutely crazy when you think about it. There are almost as many Arabs that live in Israel as Jews. That should say something, but I'm not here to drive home the point regarding the arguments of what is true versus what is not true. What needs to be said is what you're about to hear right now. And that's this. God told Israel many years ago, thousands of years ago, that she as a nation would be the apple of his eye. God said that he would use Israel as an example to the rest of the nations. And here's the thing that we know based on what the Bible tells us. We know, as I've established earlier, that this battle that we are fighting is a spiritual battle. It's not physical. We know that all of the stuff that's going on, including the demonic behavior we're seeing illustrated in Iran, including all of the wickedness that's going on all over, these things are the result of a direct capitulation to the ideals, the philosophy, the thoughts, the heart, the mind of Satan himself. That's exactly what all of this is. And the more Satan is being given to, the more he's yielded to, the more he is worshiped, the more he is literally followed by virtue of action, the more destruction you see begin to surround everything. Folks, a lot of people have to ask this question. Anybody who is reasonable will ask this question. Why is it that any country around the world has a license to defend themselves, but Israel doesn't? How is it that somebody like Winston Churchill, with an effort and a desire to destroy the Nazis, could take thousands and thousands and thousands of German lives and be applauded for it? But yet, if Israel happens to do the same thing because it has to deal with its direct enemy that wants to kill its citizens who happen to be operating while using innocent Palestinians as body shields, how is it that Israel gets condemned and told that they are genocidal and unreasonable and warmongering and so on and so forth? This is crazy, but let me tell you exactly what is inspiring all of this. Common sense gets thrown out the door when the enemy is yielded to. When spiritual warfare comes at a heightened level, understand the people who walk far away from the scriptures are the ones that are going to get their rears kicked in this battle. And the further away we get from what the Bible says and the instructions that the word gives us, the more suffering we're going to end up seeing. Think about it, folks. I remember being in Bethlehem. This is a great example. I was in Bethlehem in 1994, walking through that area thinking, man, this is such a beautiful little town. How in the world did anybody think this was such a bad town? I walked through the streets. You could smell the bread cooking. You could hear singing on certain corners, families together. There was such a special thing about the air in that city. I went back a year later, which happened to be 6 months after the Palestinian Authority took it over. Actually, at the time, they were known as the PLO. They took it over, and I could not believe how ugly the city was. The smell of bread was replaced by the smell of urine. You had smoke everywhere, walls and fences beginning to go up because of the insanity of the shooting that was going on every day. And the thing that changed was as the Palestinian Liberation Organization came in, now known as the Palestinian Authority, and did what they did, they sought to destroy any Christian influence that existed in the city, and Bethlehem was predominantly a Christian city, and it was under the control of Israel. Is it all about Israel controlling the city versus no longer controlling the city? No, it's all about the spiritual forces that were at work. And right now, that's exactly what we're going to see. That's exactly what we are seeing. Do you honestly think that when military individuals seek to walk into a facility where hospitals are being taken over and men, women, and children are being put in very, very difficult spots simply because they happen to be there, do you honestly think that type of thing is being inspired by somebody who's trying to make a point for the betterment of their lives? These people are not concerned with the betterment of their lives. They are concerned with an ideological philosophy that is not even a philosophy. It's an ideological way of thinking that is propagated onto them through the language of the Quran. That's what we're dealing with right here. And I want everybody to understand it for what it is. This is spiritual warfare. And look, I have quoted this so many times that I'm getting tired of quoting it. But the Quran says that Allah is the chief of deceivers. The Bible says that the devil is the chief of liars. So you tell me, who are we dealing with here? The secular Jews, in many ways, are no better. They're yielding themselves to definitely not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They have forsaken their God. But it doesn't change the position that God says he would be in with them at one point. The bottom line is this. All of what we're looking at is very spiritual. Here's the truth. The truth is nothing gets fixed until God himself intervenes. And the Bible tells us that God will indeed intervene. I speak about the things that I speak about, and I defend Israel because I defend the truth, and I embrace the truth, and I stand for the truth. I've been taught to do so, and God has called me as a pastor to continue to speak the truth. But the reality of everything that we're talking about here centers around another very critical and important issue, and that is God does not place a contingency upon the commands that he gives us to stand up for the things that are right. So I do it not because I think I can make a change. I do it because God has called me to do it. It's that simple. It's a plain and simple issue, folks. This is not difficult. But the only way that this is going to get permanently fixed is by God himself intervening. It's the only way that this is going to get fixed. And one day that will happen because the Bible tells us that the church will be raptured before this tribulation period for the Jews begins to start. And as it does, God is going to bring his people, his ancestrally chosen people, the Jews, back to him. We know what the Bible says concerning those things. And for anybody that tells me God has replaced the Jews with the church and this is a spiritual Israel and so on and so forth, hogwash. Come on. You can't really believe that lie unless you completely ignore so many things that the Bible tells us, and you have to ignore what's happening in the current day. I'm not even going to get into that. I will say that I know lots of people who believe in this type of thinking that I love, but I don't agree with because I don't think the Bible agrees with them. But I will say this, the further you get away from the things of God, the more of this nonsense you're going to see. Folks, what do we do in this time? 3 things, very important things. Number 1, you continue to tell the truth. You stand up for the truth no matter what because you are called to do it. It's that simple, right? Number 2, live your life as God would have you to live your life. It's really simple, right? The number 1 thing that will cause you to lose your sobriety faster than anything else is sin, and the Bible tells you to watch and be sober. So stay pure and keep your eyes open and ask God to give you insight and wisdom. Here's the 3rd thing you need to do, and it's really important, right? Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray for Israel, and continue to have an open communication with anybody and everybody that will listen to you and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's really simple. You do those 3 things, and who knows what God will do. The bottom line is it's up to him to do those things and not us. But let's tell the truth, folks. This is what's going on. The battle is spiritual, and it's time for us to wake up. God bless you guys.